By the night of January the 26th, Kimura sent a reserve battalion for Olongapow to bolster their numbers. However, rough seas and possibly some really bad weather caused their landing crafts to veer off course, depositing them even further off Kunan Point at a place called Anyasan Point. Just want to see, is it on the map? No, it's between Kabobo Point and Kunan Point, though, is where they were landing. So these guys are not supposed to be landed here. This is kind of a catastrophe for the Japanese, but it's also a big surprise for the Allies as they're just throwing whoever's nearest to try and like fight these guys off. No,
So it's just confusion and demoralization for both in a way.
yeah, and this begins what is known as the Battle of the Points. Homa decided to appoint Lieutenant General Miroka Suzumu to launch an offensive against Wainwright's western sector. He assigned him 2 battalions and an engineer regiment. Miroka's men began a series of night attacks along the Orion-Bagak line. Maybe I'll just a little bit further north in the map here. And when I'm referring to night attacks, it's pretty harrowing stuff. So you got to imagine yourself as a Filipino American defender. You're in a foxhole. It's the dead of night, and you just hear some rustling in the bushes. Do you call out something like, "Hey, who's there?" Perhaps a code word. What happens if you receive an English response? Could be a Japanese guy who's just speaking English to you, and he all
Not
of a
to
sudden jumps
mention
into
in
your foxhole.
that environment, right? Like you've already been under stress, fewer rations.
Oh yeah,
It's demo, and not to mention you literally retreated like hundreds of kilometers in the past few weeks and months.
yeah,
It's not really going to be a pleasant experience.
yeah. So you have to imagine you're in your foxhole, you're expecting a buddy to come over, and it's a Japanese guy with a bayonet, and he's about to stab you. So during these night assaults, a lot of friendly fire incidents occur. If anyone's seen the famous HBO series The Pacific, it's just like the Guadalcanal scenes you see in that one. After about 3 days of these nightly engagements, a few incursions yielded some successes for the Japanese. A breach in the defensive line established itself in 2 locations, but fortunately, the defenders managed to bog down further Japanese advances, creating stalemates. On the 29th, the Philippine scouts, supported by some tanks, successfully dislodged the Japanese from Logoscoan Point. So, again, that's the one that's indicated as Suzan Point. Although the 2 other points remained under Japanese control, Marivels could breathe a little easier because they didn't arrive in Marivels. They screwed this up immensely. Now, at Logoscoan Point, the sailors and Marines probed the Japanese beachhead, but their disorganization yielded no results. Lieutenant William Hogabum, who commanded forces there, reported this: "We could not hope to continue the attack or even hold our ground with the troops at our disposal." Following their probing attacks on the 26th, Hogabum and his men were ordered to dig in and prepare for another offensive. MacArthur then sent the 2nd Battalion of the 88th Field Artillery from the Philippine Scouts, who had been withdrawing from the old Abuque line, to target the western coast and help dislodge the Japanese from the points. One battery targeted Logoscoan, while another hit Cuanan. When reports indicated that the Japanese were sending additional landing reinforcements, MacArthur ordered Wainwright on the 27th to clear the points as soon as possible. Consequently, Wainwright dispatched troops from the 57th Infantry to Logoscoan and from the 45th to Cuanan. Meanwhile, back in Corregidor, the crew of Battery Geary, armed with 8 12-inch motors, received orders to bombard Logoscoan at midnight. They would fire about 670-pound land-attacking projectiles at a range of 12,000 yards. One Japanese soldier who was involved had this to say: "We were terrified. We could not see where the big shells or the bombs were coming from. They seemed to be falling from the sky. Before I was wounded, my head was spinning. Did not know what to do. Some of my companions jumped off the cliff to try and escape the terrible fire." The bombardment was devastating. An observer on Mount Picat noted that the fires at Lagoscoan Point were so intense that they could no longer see the target. Despite this aerial support and defenders attacking on the Japanese beachhead, it still all failed. But Wainwright's reinforcements soon arrived at the scene. The following day, they targeted Lagoscoan Point with heavy guns from Corregidor, in addition to even more motors, launching an hour-long barrage. And although the defenders attacked once more, they initially met with limited success. However, as additional forces from the 57th Infantry arrived, They began to reclaim ground, and by nightfall, two-thirds of Loxguan Point had been secured. It would, however, take several more days and assistance of armored vehicles to attack and finally clear out the Japanese from the position. About 300 Japanese soldiers were killed, while the Allies would suffer 22 deaths and 66 wounded. Honestly, a colossal failure on Homa's part. This was a really stupid amphibious assault, and it goes to show the Japanese were not proficient at amphibious assaults.
And most of their amphibious assaults just hoping you hop onto a barge and just land on the beach with surprise.
Yeah, little to no other thoughts. They never had time to specialize, never had time to really train for it. Now, while the Loxguan Point was, successfully cleared, the battle would continue, 7 miles away at Kunan. By the 27th, a stalemate had developed between the 600 Japanese and the 550 assembled defenders there. On the 28th, Wainwright's reinforcements, about 500 men, arrived, and they quickly took action, but they found themselves digging in once again amidst another stalemate. Several days of continuous probing were limited, only gradually pushing the Japanese further towards the sea at a severe cost. They were losing about 50% casualties. Facing this dire situation, MacArthur deployed the 192nd Tank Battalion from the west coast, and within 2 hours, a platoon comprising 3 tanks emerged. Upon encountering the disorganized defenders, Captain Dice reported this. Excuse me. We found that the scouts had occupied 50 yards more of high jungle above the bay, at a terrible cost to themselves. Their casualties had run about 50%. The sight and stench of death was everywhere. The attack continued, forcing the Japanese into a 100 by 50 yard area on the edge of a cliff. Not fun for the Japanese, I'd say. As the assault pressed on, Japanese soldiers began to tear off their own uniforms and leap off the cliff, while others attempted to climb down. Yet even then, they were not finished. Some managed to find refuge in some caves within the cliff, and it would take an Allied gunboat to come over and shell these caves before some engineers using ropes would put explosives into the entrances and blow them up. So, yeah, it would take until apparently February the 8th to eliminate all of them. Yeah. Meanwhile, back over at the Orient Bagak line, General Nara's 65th Summer Brigade grew weary from the ongoing fighting, but they persisted in attempts to penetrate the eastern sector of the line. Just want to make sure my map, it's in a good position right now. Each assault ended in failure, compounded by unsuccessful landings on the western coast. Overall, Homa had lost 2 infantry battalions, and he could not afford to lose more. To the west, General Miroka commanded the 16th Division, and he received orders to target Wainwright's 1st Corps on the 26th. Similar to the previous actions at the Abuke line, the Japanese began
Would you
probing.
say by this point Homa's career is practically over?
Oh, yeah. His career was over, I'd say about a week into the Battle of Bataan.
Fair enough.
Yeah, his superiors were going to get rid of him. But, like in any, if you look at the military situation in North Africa during that campaign, it was kind of like with the British. They would see what commanders were aggressive, did well, what commanders were like, lame ducks, shuffle them to another place, right? They would probably be like, Homa, you're going to go to Manchuria or something. So, yeah.
You mean like a certain General Neil Ritchie?
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean, but yeah, I get it. And I think one thing I found very interesting is a lot of issues in high command never even employ the dimension of military competence. It's just your personal likes and dislikes that make the decision.
For the Axis, yes. For the Allies, not so much. Although,
Uh,
for the British,
okay, let's just put it like this: between the British and Americans, any friction that was tossed up wasn't really due to different nationalities or anything. It was just like the guys just did not like each other.
yeah, that's true. So yeah, things aren't going too well for Homa. The first division, having lost substantial equipment and remaining disorganized from the retreat, was still in the midst of preparing its defenses when all of a sudden they were attacked by Colonel Yoshioka's 20th Infantry. His men seized a formidable position that would allow them to push into the Allied line throughout the night. Before long, Yoshioka's 2,000 soldiers had split into 2 groups. One company took up a position on a hill 400 yards beyond the Allied defensive line, which became known as the Little Pocket. And at this point, because we're entering a new battle, I just want to bring up a new map. Yeah, here's okay. I'll keep it this size for now. So yeah, known as Little Pocket. The other company moved east along Trail 7, going further south, nearly a mile behind the Allied defensive positions, establishing a site that could block the north-south traffic along Trails 7 and 5, which would hinder the Allied troop movements. This one was dubbed the Big Pocket. Thus began what was known as the Battle of the Pockets. The Allies had no way of knowing the size of the Japanese forces within the Big Pocket.